I'm Leanne Ranieri. I'm the Director of Pupil Services. If you don't know me, tonight on our Zoom, we have our 3 special education supervisors, PJ Dacus, who is the supervisor for the Henderson feeder pattern, Lisa Pfeiffer for the East feeder pattern, and Melissa Kleiman for the Ruston feeder pattern. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. Wow, this is great. We've got over 200 people so far on our Zoom tonight. So this is really important. I want to be able to answer your questions. I appreciate people putting some things into the Zoom earlier. We are recording this session, and it will be, I will make sure that it will go out to all parents of children that have an IEP later this week. We will also post it on the website. So if people want to reach it that way, they'll be able to do that. I know that not everyone could come out this evening. I'm going to share a couple details to start with, and then we'll get through the questions. Lisa Pfeiffer is going to read the questions, kind of categorizing them based on the questions that were submitted earlier today. Now, there were a number of them that were very student specific. And so what I've asked the supervisors to do is to reach out to you this week for student specific questions, because we don't want to talk about a student specifically or share information that would be considered to be confidential. But you know, I promise you, we will make sure that we get back to you this week in answering those questions. Okay. Couple things I want to share with you are, there's a little bit of some confusion over who's 5 days and who's 4 days. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible when we look at this. So the students that are currently 5 days will continue 5 days. So I'll share who they are. Those are students that receive, and I'm going to do it by support. Life skills support, multiple disability support, autistic support, and elementary emotional support. Those 4 will continue to be eligible for the 5-day-a-week program moving forward. For 4 days a week, that is for learning support K to 12 and emotional support 6 through 12. For students that we have speech services only, so that they are on the case manager for a speech pathologist, they don't see a special education teacher, those students are hybrid and are 2 days a week. So we have our 5 days a week students that are the life skills, multiple disabilities, autistic support, and elementary emotional support. Our 4-day-a-week students, learning support, and secondary emotional support. And then the hybrid model, which are 2 days a week in person, are our students on a speech mode only. I also want to share with you that there are the surveys that went out for parents this week, and the surveys are for two pieces. One is for parents that are currently cyber, to ask if you want to continue to be cyber or move to the hybrid model. And the second survey is for parents that are in the remote program, and if you want to stay in remote or move to the hybrid model. Again, as I described, for the 5 days or 4 days or 2 days. Let me see. Oh, somebody asked me to repeat the third category as I cut out. I apologize for that. So the third category is for speech only. So if your child only has speech services, they would be for the hybrid model that's recommended for regular education students, where they are in school 2 days a week and remote 3 days a week. Okay. All right, so now at this time, I'm going to ask Lisa Pfeiffer to start reading me some of the questions, and then I will answer them. We're going to be on for approximately an hour, and if there's many more questions, we'll see how much longer we can stay on. I'm going to try to preserve as, you know, stay true to the 6 to 7 as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ranieri. I believe you did answer the first one in your opening. How do I know if my child is eligible for the in-person 5 days per week or 4 days per week in regards to her IEP?
Right. And I have answered that question.
Yes.
Now, one of the questions that comes a little bit later with that, we've seen a couple today, and maybe I'll try to address that now. If you feel your child is eligible for the 4-day week program, a couple of parents have asked whether or not that they can send their child just 2 days a week. And
That would
our recommendation is for these children to come 4 days a week to be able to implement their IEPs as they are written, and to be able to effectively meet the goals that are in those IEPs. If it is something that you would prefer your child to only be in school 2 days a week, the hybrid that's being offered by the district, we are going to ask you to sign a waiver that you're giving up the full implementation of that IEP that would be in place for the 4 days. If that's something that you're interested in exploring further, I would ask you to please contact one of the special education supervisors for your feeder pattern, PJ Dacus, Lisa Pfeiffer, or Melissa Kleiman, to discuss that option. Okay, Melissa, the next question.
If I want my student to return in the hybrid model, must I tell someone? What if I want my child to stay in remote? Must I tell someone?
Great question. So hybrid is the default. So if you do not complete that survey that was sent out, your child automatically will be in the hybrid. If you are currently in remote though, and want your child to go to hybrid, then you want your child to stay in remote, please make sure that you fill out that survey that was sent out. Our supervisors, principals, and others are in the process of determining the class sizes and as well as our teacher assignments that may need to be adjusted slightly. So the more accurate information we have in regards to parent preference, the easier that will be to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of our students.
Dr. Ranieri, can you please explain what regular education will look like for my child, since they will be in 4 days per week and their peers will only be in 2? Will there be a repeat of instruction?
No, there won't be a repeat of instruction. If we were to repeat, let's say, because we know now that the students that are in the A group are in Mondays and Tuesdays, and students in the B group are in Thursdays and Friday. If we were to repeat that, we'd only be able to cover half of the curriculum. So it's really not feasible to do that. So what we will be doing is, even in regular education, those students that are at home will either be synchronously participating in the class during the live instruction, or they will be getting some asynchronous instructions at home. So if your child is in school for the 4 days, they will be getting 4 days of instruction that will look different. And I used an example earlier today that, if it's a biology course and they're doing a lab and they're dissecting a frog on a Monday, then when they get to the B group, maybe they'll be dissecting a lizard or some other, other mammal type, or I'm sorry, other animal. And so at least the experience will be different. They might be working on the same unit, like if it's social studies and they're studying American history, or Pennsylvania, there might be some, similar types of activities that are taking place because of that unit, but it will not be identical instruction.
Can you please define what related services are? Will current therapy schedules change? For example, my child currently receives therapy on Wednesdays. Will they get a chance for in-person therapy?
Okay. So the related services are speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Some students receive like hearing impaired support, maybe as a related service. Those are the types of things that are related services. I just met with our occupational and physical therapists today and the speech therapists at the end of last week. Because we're going to be having schedules change, some of the schedules for our students unfortunately will need to change as well. What I've asked them to do is, if your child receives services twice a week, to make sure that one of those sessions is in person when your child is in school. That if it's 2 sessions or more, one of those sessions may be on the remote day. As much as possible, they're going to try to see the students in person. Obviously, for the students that are 5 days a week, they will be in person for all of their sessions.
Why are face shields not listed under an option for face coverings for elementary students, but they are a choice for middle and high school students?
That's a good pickup. That was an error, and we actually talked about that in an administrative meeting this morning, and that is going to be corrected. For face coverings for all students, it is the same. Students will be able to wear a face mask or a face shield. We are looking at, we will provide the disposable face masks. We also have a donation, I believe, of cloth masks that are going available for most students in the school district. So parents can either provide their own, or we will provide them at school for students.
How many kids are estimated to return 4 times per week?
That's a good question. We have about 1,800 students with IEPs, and I would say the majority of those students will be eligible either for the 5 or 4 days. I don't have the exact number, but I'd say, like I said, it's only those speech-only students that would not be eligible to return. So 1,500 students with IEPs and I'm saying that approximately because I didn't look that up, would be eligible for the 4 or 5 days.
This one you partially answered before, but it's a little bit different. What happens if we only want our child to attend 2 days per week, or if all of their special education classes are in the morning, can I pick him up and do virtual in the afternoon?
Okay. The students would need to stay in for the full day. We're not going to have students leave halfway through the day. So that's one answer. And as far as the hybrid piece, again, if you want 2 days, I would recommend that you talk to the special education supervisor and talk about a waiver potentially being put in place, because you're asking for something that's less than what we are providing.
If I choose to keep my child in the remote program, how will their IEP be implemented?
Okay, it will look very similar to what it looks like right now. For the beginning of the year. And so that would be true of even what the remote day, that Wednesday, would look very similar to what it is today, or is currently taking place. And then for those parents for special education services, would look very similar to what the students are receiving now. Now, in regular education, it could be more asynchronous. Not that there wouldn't be synchronous instruction, so not that there wouldn't be live interaction with their class, but there will be more asynchronous instruction taking place, more activities that they would be doing independently if students choose to stay remote.
This question relates to contact. Should we assume IEP students will have contact with both Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday students? Also, at the middle school level, what will the process for switching classrooms between classes be? Are students crossing paths with all grade levels, or are they generally kept in the areas of the school by grade?
Okay, some of that I can answer, and some we're working on those responses, but I'll give some examples. So students will be exposed to both the A students and the B students in your class. So if your child's in 3rd grade, they will be exposed to both the students, the first half and the A students, and then the second half and the B students, because they will be in the regular education class as they would be for all 4 days. They won't be zooming in for that instruction. The principals are working on plans as we speak, as far as like at the middle school level, as far as exchanging classes. One of the reasons we stayed with the block schedule is so that students, it would minimize, it's only 4 periods in the day. So it's minimizing the contact. And if there is a positive case, it may limit the amount of closure that we need to have for that particular situation. Many of the buildings are looking at, one direction going in hallways or up and down stairwells, things along those lines. Looking at, the dismissal and arrival times. So each of the principals, because each building is unique in the way it is set up, they are working on what's going to be best for that particular building, because some are on the same floor and others are multi-floors.
Will there be bus transportation for all of the days to and from school?
Yes, there will be, yes.
What is the process for positive COVID cases? If someone in cohort A tests positive, what happens to cohort B, since my child will be in both cohorts? How will this impact them?
That's a good question. So for any suspicion of a COVID situation, we are contacting the Chester County Health Department. There is a form that needs to be completed that the school nurse will complete and submit. And we actually have a liaison from the health department that we can directly ask questions for. And then based on the situation, there's all kinds of algorithms. So there's definitely not like one answer to these questions. We definitely look at each unique situation to determine what happens next. If it is a COVID positive situation in, like you said, cohort A, most likely cohort A would need to quarantine those students. But again, the health department makes that decision. They do the contact tracing. They will contact the families in that particular class and then make the recommendation as to what needs to be followed. If there's a crossover, as you shared, like your child is in A and then they are in B, there is a possibility that that B cohort may need to be quarantined as well. It will depend on the situation. As an example, they call in close contact within 6 feet for 15 minutes or longer with that person. So that may mean, that's how that looks is going to be the amount of crossover that took place between those two cohorts of students.
I want to keep my child in cyber only. Will his program change?
No, the cyber only students will continue as is. They will be, their schedule is not changing, and so that will stay the same.
My daughter is currently remote learning. She is not comfortable with going back to brick and mortar due to COVID-19. However, remote is not effective for her. Can she switch to cyber only?
We would do that as an IEP team decision, and we would need to hold that IEP meeting. We'd also need to look for making sure, depending upon the level, that there is space in the cyber program to take new students on. But it is possible for that to take place. Now remember, cyber is more asynchronous, more independent work. So you need to look at your child and what they might be struggling with during the remote instruction, and then determine if the needs could be met in that cyber environment.
I have twins. One is eligible for 4 days per week. The other isn't. Can they both do 2 days or both come 4 days?
If for the child, so the child without the IEP cannot come 4 days. We're taxing the maximum amount of students that are allowed in a regular education classroom being 6 feet apart. And so we can't add additional students on to what we're currently talking about, especially with having the majority of our special education students being in for 4 or 5 days. Now, if you choose to have both of them be in for 2 days, the hybrid, the child with the IEP, we would need to look at a waiver.
Since symptoms of COVID are similar to those of allergies and the common cold, do we need to keep our children home anytime they have a cough, headache, or mild sore throat? And if so, will my child's learning support, what would happen to my child's learning support if he has to stay home due to various symptoms?
Sure. And that's a really good question, because allergy season is happening right now. Many of us are experiencing that. If you want to use that self-monitoring checklist, and if you haven't seen it, we'll make sure that that is issued prior to the October 19th, that we're asking all parents to be able to ask and review. If you meet certain criteria to stay home, stay home. Call the school nurse if you have questions about that, or your pediatrician to determine, what you should be doing. Yes, your child then on that day, if they feel up to it, can certainly Zoom into their instruction during the day. Because if you remember, with half the cohort being home and half being in school, there's always going to be opportunity to be able to Zoom in for at least part of the day if your child's home and ill or needs to quarantine for any reason.
If you choose to send your child back to school, either 2 days or 4 days, is there an option to pull the child back out into remote learning?
Yes, if you feel after you've started for whatever reason that you're not comfortable with your child continuing in the hybrid model, you can choose to move back to the remote.
Can you explain during small group IEP how students will maintain 6 feet of distance when interacting with teachers, especially if they are writing and need help with their work?
Okay. As we know, students that have IEPs have more unique needs, and we will keep students 6 feet apart from one another. And that could be in groupings at a table, may mean that only 2 students are at a table. It could be that the group is the teacher is working with students in an area where students have desks that are 6 feet apart. It may not be feasible at all times for teachers to be 6 feet away, or adults like paraprofessionals 6 feet away from the children in order to be able to provide the education. You know, as an example, passing out papers, you know, wanting to see if a child is on task and completing the assignment correctly, being able to check on student work. Those are situations where it may not be feasible for the teacher to be 6 feet apart, but we will maintain the distance for our students to be 6 feet apart.
Can my son stay in cyber but still come to Glen Acres for his IEP classes only?
Not if you're totally cyber. You would stay cyber. If you choose to want to do in person, then you would move to the hybrid model.
Are lunch periods going to be held in the cafeteria? If so, are there other options such as eating in the classroom?
We are aiming to be able to hold lunches in the cafeteria in most situations. And what we're doing is having tables set up 6 feet with students 6 feet apart, facing the same direction. We will, if we can't get all students in the cafeteria, we're using other spaces to be able to do that. There may be some situations where students reading in the classroom. The concern with that is having adult coverage, because it is a time that we're also having staff be able to have their lunches. So it may not be feasible to have lunch in the classroom.
Is it possible to start with 2 days and move to 4, or is it possible to move from 4 days to 2?
If you, again, we'd have to use that, what we're offering for our offer of FAPE and meeting the IEP needs is the 5 or the 4 days. If you want something different than the 4 days, we would need to have a waiver. But yes, you could move from one to the other.
My daughter also attends the Technical College High School at Brandywine campus on alternate days of the week. How will this impact attending this hybrid schooling?
Your daughter would still be able to attend the TCHS program as she currently is able to attend.
If I'm not ready to send my child back to school, how will that impact the services he receives?
Then you would be staying remote, and it would look very similar to what it does now. Okay. Except for, as I shared earlier, regular education may be more asynchronous. But as far as the special education services are concerned, it would look very similar to what they are currently.
If my student is in the cyber program, then I think you already answered this. Can they receive in-person related services?
Not if they're currently receiving them via cyber, no.
Will current bus schedules be changing, and when will we receive the new bus schedules?
That's a really good question as well. So on October 19th, the schedules will be changing for all grade levels, even though secondary is not starting until October 29th. So in order to be able to transport our current students that are in 5 days a week, and we're moving to back to that tiered system, so that they will go back to just about the same starting time as in prior years. And at the end of the day, it will be 1/2 hour earlier that students will be dismissed. This will give time for teachers to do planning, collaborating, communicating with parents, and giving that time, because it is taking extra time for the planning as we move from one model to the next, and we want to optimize that. That goes into effect on October 19th for all 4 of those tiers, 2 at the elementary, Pierce and Stetson on the next level, and then all high schools and Fugit on that other level. If you saw Dr. Scanlon's presentation last week, he addressed that within the presentation, and it gives you those time ranges, and then all that information is on the district's website.
And this is the last one that we synthesized. Did we receive the survey yet, and when are they due?
You should have received the survey at the end of last week. And that came out of Dr. Sokolowski's office for secondary and Dr. Missett for elementary. If you did not receive a survey asking whether or not you wanted to go from cyber to hybrid or remote to hybrid, then please contact your building principal to find out why you didn't receive that survey.
And that is the last synthesized question on the Google Doc.
Okay, there are some questions that have come in the chat. Would you mind kind of just going through some of those?
Nope. Let me just get into that, please. All right. I'm going to go up to the beginning.
And just another reminder too, we might need to refresh that spreadsheet if there was any new questions that came in since the presentation started.
Okay, some of these I'm going to skip over if you've already answered it. One was another just wanting to go 2 days rather than 4, which you answered. It says, can you please repeat the third category as you cut out? I wonder if you're talking about the categories of who would come either for, okay.
And I repeated that.
Okay. What about social skills only 30 minutes per week?
So, and those students, if they're on a learning support caseload, they can come in the 4 days a week. And I may seem very minor because it's a small amount of services that a student is receiving. I can share with you that a lot of the questions that I have received in the last couple months for students are the students that really have struggled with attentional issues, social, emotional, difficulty focusing, difficulty relating on Zoom, things along those lines. And so although when I look at those IEPs and I've checked when parents have given me that information, they may not have received a lot of services within the special education classrooms. If the remote environment is really impacting their ability to access their education. It may not be specifically related to their disability, but it really has impacted them and the challenges that have gone with that and the challenges parents are experiencing as a result of that. So the students that are maybe receiving organizational skills, study skills, strategies, things along those lines, they still can come in or recommended to come in the 4 days a week to hopefully better meet the needs because the environment, it will be different in the brick and mortar. There is one thing I wanted to share that didn't come out in the questions earlier, and I want to make sure it's clear. And I know that some parents are going to be disappointed with this, but it is something that is necessary for us to do. There are, for elementary and for secondary, there is 4 days where students will be remote only. And this really is primarily impacting our 5-day-a-week students and that are in special education currently and our English language development students that are in 5 days a week. We need to move some of our classrooms back to their home buildings. And we need teachers to be able to have time to be able to do that, to also plan to move into the hybrid model, to continue to collaborate, to revise schedules, to work with the related service staff on what those schedules may look like in order to be very effective when we move into that hybrid model. So during the week of October 12th is an in-service day. All students are off that day. There is no school. For elementary only, on during 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th, that will be remote instruction in the morning. No students will be in elementary, in the brick and mortar, in the schools that week. In the morning, they will be in remote instruction in the morning, and then their half days, there's no instruction in the afternoon. Secondary students will be having their regular schedules during that time period. It is not affected. Cyber students are not affected. When we get to October 29th and we look at secondary transitioning back to going to the hybrid model, October 29th, October 30th, November 2nd, and November 4th will be half days for secondary students. And that means for secondary students, they will be remote only on those 4 days in the morning, and then there's no instruction in the afternoon. November 3rd is an in-service day, and schools are closed that day. There is no instruction. During that time for secondary, though, elementary will be in their hybrid models for those full days. And so it's 1 week will be remote for elementary and 1 week will be remote for our secondary students. So I did want to make sure that that was clear, because I know it's a challenge, but it is, in order to be effective as we move into the hybrid model, it is something that is necessary for us to be able to do. Other questions, Lisa?
Yes, will there be an orientation for ninth grade students before 11/5?
I don't, I can look into that one. I'm not sure. What I can, I don't believe there's something separate, but I'm going to write myself a note and find out, and then I can include that in my response when we send out the video. What I can share with you is when we return, so when students, for example, return on October 19th, this is for regular education as well as our students with IEPs, that those, when they do the instruction on those A days and the B days, that is going to be kind of reintegrating into school, talking about you know, their schedule, what social distancing looks like, how to wear a face mask, face covering, face shield, how to, you know, when we do sanitizing, and how do we do the cleaning process and hand washing. You know, how do we navigate the hallways? You know, for kids that, you know, are new, like our kindergarten kids, for all, what are the classroom rules? What's it going to look like for instruction? So that those first couple of days is really helping kids to reorient, to start to build relationships with students live in class and their teachers. I know the teachers have been doing a great job trying to develop that rapport even remotely, but now it's an opportunity to do that within the classroom. So that's a time for orientation as well. So if it's not happening prior, those first couple days are really devoted for orientation for everyone.
If you choose to keep remote, then you would have to sign a waiver?
Not for staying remote, only if you go hybrid and you don't want the 4 days. If you want something less than 4 days, you do not need to sign a waiver if you are staying remote.
You answered the next one about bus schedules. This one is regarding the state of emergency in Westchester. How is it affecting the school opening on 10/19? My daughter is currently in the autism support class 5 days a week, going back to her home school.
Sure. So let me explain. So the mayor put that declaration in place because without it, she is unable to impose fines for individuals who are not following the social distancing and following the wearing of the face coverings. There have been a lot of incidences where within the borough that there are situations where people are refusing to wear masks. And this gives her the ability to invoke those fines for those individuals. When they look at as far as where the concern areas are, I know that there's been some focus on Westchester University. If you listened to Dr. Scanlon last week when he did his presentation, there were 14 students that were identified as COVID positive on the university, which is not very, I mean, it's certainly more than we would like to have, but not very many in comparison to the number of students that are currently on campus. There is also a pocket area in the borough that like a neighborhood area where they've seen a higher incidence of COVID positive that is causing some of the numbers to spike, those two items. But the main reason the mayor put that in place was to be able to impose fines for individuals. So from a school district perspective, it is not impacting our ability to open on the 19th. We do continue to monitor those numbers that are on Friday afternoons. And if we are not meeting the criteria for hybrid, then we would certainly put that off. And as Dr. Scanlon shared, we review those numbers every Friday.
How will they do specials if they're in school?
Specials at the elementary level, art and music will be, and library are being pushed into the regular education classrooms, and physical education will be in the gym, outside, but will not be in the classroom.
Leanne, I know you told parents to check with their principals if they did not see the survey. Do you know what day it was sent out?
I want to say it was sent out Thursday, or I believe Thursday or Friday at the latest. And it is due like tomorrow or Wednesday. So it is important that if you could reach out to your principals about that. I believe there might be a reminder coming out about that as well. But I would, make sure that your principal are aware that if for some reason that you didn't receive it. The parent portal hasn't opened or is just opening, and if there's updated contact information that hasn't put in there, it could have been sent to an older email or something along those lines. So, don't, hesitate to reach out to your principals.
Dr. Ranieri, I also put the links in the chat box for the elementary and secondary remote programs. I just found the elementary cyber link. I'm looking for the secondary cyber link. However, you can't find them in the chat. The remote ones are posted on our website. If you go to the homepage and click Return to Hybrid Model, open up that, you'll see the links there to complete.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
This question is about the Discover program. My son currently receives Discover program via Zoom. How will that change if he goes 4 days to school?
Then they will be in person, and we're working on, as safely as possible, having students be able to go be in the community to get back to more of a regular schedule.
If a child is in the process of receiving an IEP, can they attend once the IEP is in place?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, Lisa.
It sounds like the child is in the process of being identified, or maybe there's an IEP meeting coming up for a newly identified student. Once the IEP is in place, can they begin attending, I guess, the 4 days a week?
Yes, until, during the evaluation process, and until an IEP is in place, this child would join the hybrid model of the 2 days per week in person and then remote for 3 days. Once an IEP has been approved via the NORAP, we would be able to offer the 4 day a week or 5 day a week program for that child, and they could enter that at that time.
Okay. Dr. Ranieri, there's probably someone that has a child that gets speech and OT. I don't know who the case manager is, so she's wondering if they qualify for 4 days per week.
If it is a speech therapist that is the case manager, the answer is no. That student would only be coming in for the hybrid model for the 2 days a week. If it is a learning support teacher that is the case manager, some of our students with speech also receive some learning support that would include occupational therapy. If the child is on a learning support caseload, then the student is eligible for 4 days a week.
Is there a chance, depending on the viral numbers, that all children except those requiring 5 days would have to return to home for all virtual learning?
If numbers increase, that we would need to close the entire district, we would be back in the same situation we were in this spring, and that all students would need to be, the schools would need to be closed, and no students would be in person, even our 5 day a week students. And that would mean, and I don't know where the governor is as far as if he's going to be sticking with that red, yellow, green, or they're moving to some other model. But if we needed to shut down the district, that would mean the entire district would need to shut down because the virus has, numbers have gotten too high. Now there will be or could be situations, depending upon if there's COVID positive students being identified, that we may need to close a building for a period of time, but that would not necessarily shut the entire district down. That might just shut that particular building down. And at that time, students would go to that remote learning, that next day, it would just revert to remote instruction for the period of time that school building would need to be closed.
Dr. Ranieri, I think some people are confused because we're saying that we need to sign a waiver for 2 days instead of 4, but they don't need to sign a waiver for remote. They're saying that remote still doesn't take advantage of the IEP. So can you maybe clarify that for them?
Because remote is available for all students, we don't need a remote for parents to be able to stay in there. And all students have that ability. having an IEP to be in 4 days a week, not all students are eligible to be able to stay in for those 4 days.
Okay. I'm just going to scan through them. Some of these are pretty repetitive. The survey links are in there. Talked about cohorts.
And if PJ or Melissa just want to look back at the spreadsheet just to see,
Yep.
kind of refresh that and see if there's any questions got added that way since the last ones, that would be good.
Yeah, and I think you did address if people choose to sign the waiver from a 2-day instead of a 4 or 5, how would we address the IEP? That's a question.
How would we address the IEP if they are 4 days versus 2 days?
If they're 2 days, if they sign a waiver and they're coming in 2 days instead of 4 or 5.
Okay, so if the IEP would be implemented to the best of our ability, the 2 days that they are in person, and they'd be receiving the instruction remotely those other 3 days.
Some concern about a teacher managing hybrid and virtual classes at the same time. Both hybrid, I guess, and in-person, virtual and in-person classes at the same time.
Having the teachers be able to do that. Interestingly, I just earlier this evening, there was pilots that have been taking place in the last week, and this was regular education teachers, and some of our learning support teachers also participated, where they actually had some students come into the classroom and had some students at home. Interesting that, different perspectives from the different grade levels of teachers, but it's a matter of being able to engage those students at home as well as the students in class. And it will take some time, and there is some professional development that is available. Now, there could be situations where, depending upon what the lesson is, it's very conducive to have all at the same time doing the exact same lesson. And there might be other times, like it might be where the teacher will concentrate on the students in front of him or her to provide some direct instruction and give an activity for the students at home for that period of time to be able to complete. And then do the same where his or her focus might be the next part of the lesson with the students at home, and giving the students in class an opportunity to work independently. And if you think about it, looking at the elementary level, when we have like a 90-minute block for English language arts, the teacher is often working in small groups, like reading groups. And then the students that are not with the teacher are doing different kinds of activities, like kind of rotating those activities. So the teacher will need to do something very similar with students that are at home. It's just like a small group at home that they would be instructing possibly, directly with them, but giving them an alternate activity to work on with their working with the students in the classroom. Now, again, there could be other situations where I heard today where they put up on the smart board all the students that were at home, and then that way they could see the students that are in the class, and the students in the class could see the students at home, and then the teacher taught to all of them. So I think you're going to see various models depending upon what the subject area and the content is that is being taught.
Lunches and after-school sports. Will we be serving hot lunches, or will students bring their lunch from home? And students that are remote, will they still be permitted to do sports after school?
So students that are at home and remote are still welcome to do sports. So that's an easy question to answer. When it comes to the lunches, I think they may be starting out more of the cold lunches with the goal of moving to hot lunches. I don't know if they're starting with hot lunches. Now, we were approved, and this will go through, I believe, through December, that we're eligible to be able to provide breakfast and lunch for free for all students, regardless of eligibility for free and reduced lunch. And that, and that is for every student in the district. So I have a meeting tomorrow with our food services providers to talk about how that will look. Right now we're providing meals at Henderson High School, and we're also providing them in school for our students that are currently in the 5-day program. So we'll talk about what that will look like moving forward, but we will be serving them. Now, breakfast will be grab and go that can be taken to the classrooms or eaten in the cafeterias, depending upon the building. And then lunches would be served. Now, they will all be prepackaged. It's not a buffet where students will choose from. They will be just getting what that meal is for that particular day.
Parents are questioning ACP if they'll operate for that Wednesday when the children are not in school.
So my understanding for ACP is that they will still be continuing to operate 5 days a week in person during the day, as well as the before and after care at the elementary level.
Parents are asking if a letter is going to be sent or an email notifying them that their child is eligible for 4 days a week.
No, we're not sending a letter. I mean, if you have a question about your specific child, we certainly can answer them. I've probably answered about 50 or 60 of them since I put the first notification out. Again, I think really almost all students are eligible to be either in 5 days or 4 days, except for students that only see the speech therapist, or meaning the speech therapist is the case manager for the child's IEP.
Some people are confused about the difference between remote and apparently what's called interim remote as per the high school schedule.
Okay. So the interim remote, and I'm not as well versed on this one, is an interim schedule for the next 3 weeks starting October 19th until November 5th, which will look slightly different once we go into the brick and mortar on November 5th. I think the time for those classes might be slightly different because, again, students are home for the lunch and so forth. So I think that's why. So it's just an interim schedule until they are in person.
Okay. But again, another question, but you did clarify this. Why the students that are currently in class in the brick and mortar buildings 5 days a week, why do they have to do those 4 days of remote? And you did explain, I believe that was because people had to move back to buildings.
Correct. And preparing for that hybrid model, having adequate staffing to be able to do that, the planning and the preparation. And again, that move back, for some don't have to move, and I understand that, but we can't provide transportation to some classes and not others. So it needs to be consistent. As much as I know that is a challenge, we tried to give as much notice as possible on that. Obviously, secondary gets a little bit more notification than elementary, but it is, I think, to better meet the needs of all students.
Okay, just clarifying that you only need to return Dr. Sokolowski's survey if you are choosing remote. Otherwise, the default is hybrid.
Correct. I mean, you could certainly complete it. I mean, no one's going to be upset if you say, I want to stay, I want to go hybrid. But I mean, we'll make the assumption that you're going hybrid if you don't complete the survey.
And I'd like to, Dr. Ranieri, many parents are still confused whether their child is returning 4 days a week. Can they, maybe we can suggest they email the supervisor, either PJ, Melissa, or myself, depending on what school your child is in. And we'll be happy to respond to let you know if your child is a 4 day per week student.
Sure. And obviously, if your child's eligible for 5 weeks, they've been in school for this time period, so you know that. And again, 4 days a week is, our learning support K to 12 and our secondary emotional support. So there's really the majority of our students, and our speech only typically is at the elementary level. There's a few students at the secondary level that only have a speech therapist as their case manager. So the majority of the students will be eligible for the 4 days.
Another question about, do students have to go all 4 days for high school orientation? I'm not sure about that.
So they would be, that we starting November 5th, which would be the November 5th, 6th, 9th, and 10th, they would still go all 4 days, yes.
Okay. Some questions about, will learning and tests online remain to be online when they're remote?
Yes.
Many of the questions, okay, and again, I apologize. I'm going to make sure there's a lot of questions here, and I know that probably more in the Google Doc. If you have any questions about the waiver, please reach out to your supervisor. We'll be happy to email that back, give you a response.
There are no additional questions in the Google Doc at this time.
Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm just going to glaze through to see if I see anything that we haven't even talked about yet.
There's the only thing, because I've been answering a lot of the questions as they came into the chat and posting some links. I think the biggest one is about paraprofessionals in the schools at this point in time. Dr. Ranieri.
Okay, so we're in the process. I mean, we have about over 200 paraprofessionals that work in our district, probably close to 250, and that we have in person. That are district employees as well as contractors. We distributed them to meet the needs of students within the remote setting as much as we possibly could. As we move back into the hybrid, we are going to need to make some changes. Now, that doesn't mean everyone is changing. We're not looking to make changes unnecessarily, but as we move into that hybrid model, the needs are going to be different, and we're working on making those recommendations for changes. Casey Wyatt, our pupil service specialist, who supervises our paraprofessionals, where we met with her today with the supervisors to discuss that and talk about what those recommendations will be. She is hoping by the end of the week to have those ready to go. In addition to that, we lose a number of our paraprofessionals both through agency and the district on a daily basis for various reasons that they choose not to continue to work in the setting. So we have an advertisement out for paraprofessionals on the district for district paras, and we are continuing to work with our agencies to secure as many paraprofessionals as possible. But there will be some changes to those paraprofessional assignments.
And the very last one, just so that you know, it's the last question about a waiver. Wondering if this is a waiver that was cleared by the Department of Ed.
No, the Department of Education does not clear waivers. That it would be something that goes through our special education attorneys. They develop it, and again, we share it with our parents.
They want. Will we be putting out an FAQ, Dr. Ranieri?
There is an FAQs that are being developed for the whole district. So we can certainly add some questions regarding special education. I know Dr. Scanlon reached out to me at the end of last week into like 5 days a week, 4 days a week, and so forth, and I've given him that information.
Do you think it might be helpful if PJ, Melissa, and I remind the parents of the schools in each of the feeder pattern that we're connected to? Because
sure, go right ahead. That'd be great.
So I'm Lisa Pfeiffer. I'm the East Feeder Supervisor. I'm connected to Glen Acres, East Goshen Elementary, Exton Elementary, Fern Hill Elementary, Fugate Middle School, and East High School. PJ?
I'm PJ Dacus. I'm the supervisor special ed for the Henderson feeder pattern. So I have Mary C. House, Hillsdale, East Bradford, Pierce, Henderson, and the 18 to 21 program. That's
sorry. And I'm Melissa Kleiman, the supervisor for the Ruston feeder pattern, Westtown Thornberry Elementary Schools, Starkweather, Stetson Middle School, Ruston High School. I also posted in the chat all of our names and our email addresses, so you can find them there. So you have the correct spelling of our names.
Thank you. And if some people are asking for a copy of the waiver. It isn't, every one of the waivers are individualized per your situation and your child. So that is something that I would reach out to your special education supervisor to talk about what your areas of concern are. And I would, so that would be, I think, to help out that. So as you make that decision and what that looks like and what it means for your specific situation. Again, we want to make sure that we're providing the maximum amount of services for our students. You know, as I shared earlier, one of the biggest struggles that we've heard from families is that my child needs to be in school. They're not learning in the remote environment the way they would be in school. Please open school. Please have our child in for as much as possible. even when we brought the students in for the 5 days a week, many of the parents that were asking the question is, why can't my child come in person? So we're really trying to maximize that and provide as much as we can. You as the parent have to make that decision for your child and what you believe is best for your child and your family. And we will certainly honor that request and work with you on that. This is, a very trying time. None of us have gone through any of this before. And I know it's very confusing going from all the different models that we have to our goal is to strive to get everyone back in person 5 days a week as soon as we safely can do that. And as we go along, there's going to be lots of questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. If we don't have the answer, we'll certainly find them for you. And some of your questions really help us to learn what we have to figure out in order to, as we go through this process. So we appreciate your patience and your care as we go through and we move to this next phase. Was there anything else that came through that I didn't address?
A lot of thank yous. So thank you, parents. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for doing your job at home. We know that you're helping your children a whole lot since they're not in school and, not necessarily something you had signed up for initially. But so we really do appreciate all your hard work with the kids.
One question, but this is really a regular ed question, the parent. It's about Math Plus and Reading Plus, and it may be if you get specific question. Those are general education classes, so you would want to contact a school administrator to see, what if they will still be running. I anticipate they will be, but the principal would be the best person to answer that question.
There is a question, and actually probably this is one for everyone, about high school students that are both cyber and remote. How is that handled in terms of coming in or not? Do they need to complete a waiver, or should they fill out the form saying that their child will remain remote?
I would say that you want to you fill out you're staying remote. Where you would come in that situation is if you were choosing cyber, and for the cyber courses, and this is really a secondary question, and then you wanted to have hybrid for the special education classes. And that can be done. And then if your child would come in for the hybrid classes 4 days out of the 5 days, and we would provide transportation for that to take place. I think that's it. We did pretty good at 6:59. Okay. Let's see.
Dr. Ranieri,
Yes.
can I ask one question? I'm
Sure,
not
go ahead.
sure what my daughter falls under for 4-5-2. How do I find that out?
It's 4 days a week.
Lillian's 4. Okay, great.
Yep.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. We met with I see another question about as far as 4 days a week in our case managers. We met with all of our pupil services staff last week and explained some of those, the differences as well. And our supervisors will be meeting within small group next week for elementary, and then that week a little later on with our secondary teachers to answer a lot of their questions. I mean, because they're figuring this out as we go as well. But they certainly will know whether your child is eligible for the 4 days. If you reach out to the case manager, that's another way to find that information. All right, I'm going to, at this point, probably end this session. But again, I thank you for coming out. If you think of questions later, please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us. We want to make sure that you feel that you're fully informed as you make your decision moving forward. Have a good evening.